It's a long passage. I didn't choose it. Just it was how things fell out in splitting up the book of Acts. So just for your info on that, Jerome and I did not collude together in any way on this, and it just happened this way. I'm going to start you off with a question, since this finishes up with at the end of the reading, talks about they killed the righteous one being Jesus, the righteous one being the Son of God or God incarnate. That is who was killed. It says that here, but I want us to leave that as a question to ponder before I get going. Who killed Jesus? I mean, technically it was some Roman soldiers, but they're doing it under orders, and their orders are from Pilate, the ruler. And yet Pilate is being coerced into giving his order by a Jewish mob who are in turn stirred up by the Jewish leaders. Who killed Jesus? If we're going to throw some guilt around, who should that be thrown to? Who deserves blame? And I'll come back to that later. So this lesson is, so I put it, it's a history lesson about a history lesson. And for those of you who have suffered through my history lessons, you know how much I love history. So my response to seeing that I was going to get to do this was, how cool is this? Wow. I get to do a history lesson about a history lesson. The context here is the early church in Jerusalem. They're just getting going. They have been meeting in the temple where, of course, we go to celebrate God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, the God that we believe has created the entire heavens and earth. And that's where they're meeting. And Stephen is picked as one of their leaders, and he's a person who God empowers to do some wonders and healings. And if I turn back a bit to Acts chapter 6, what we read at the end last week, so then some of those who belonged to the synagogue of the freedmen, as it was called, and of the Cyrenians and of the Alexandrians and of those from Cilicia and Asia rose up and disputed with Stephen. They don't tell us what we're disputing about, but it's most likely about Jesus Christ and who he is, what he's done for us, what his death on the cross means for us. Then they secretly instigated men who said, "We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and God." Of course, Moses is the one who delivers the Jewish law 1,500 years earlier, about 3,500 years from our time. He delivered the law that the Jewish people were required to follow. And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and seized him and brought him before the council. And they set up false witnesses who said, "This man never ceases to speak words against this holy place and the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and will change the customs that Moses delivered to us." And gazing at him, all who sat in the council saw that his face was like the face of an angel. That's what we read last time. So we have a trial scene developing. The trial scene is with the main council in Jerusalem that's at the temple. And a few of the things there, they talk about, they secretly instigated men who said, "We have heard him speak blasphemous words." We have perjury. We have collusion. What else we got there? Fake news. And character assassination. And they're going to pull him in front of this political council, and they're going to try him. And I word it that way just so you get a sense that what we hear in the news today is been going on for a while, since this is 2,000 years before our time. This whole bit of people yelling perjury and collusion and other things been going on for a bit. The thing that I want to emphasize here, though, it is not just that it's been going on then, but at this point, there are already laws on the books about this. And so if I go back to Exodus 20, verse 16, see if I can find that. One of our 10 commandments, the 9th one, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. A bit of that perjury stuff. Don't do that. So that's 1,500 years before that time. I guess Moses somehow anticipated we were going to have this perjury problem in our era. This is the law that comes to us through Moses. A little further up, Leviticus 19 starts out, verse 15. You shall do no injustice in court. And so this entire court case is intended as an act of injustice. You shall not be partial to the poor, defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And so we're usually good with this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But maybe not quite the rest of it. We'll still go on perjuring, slandering our neighbor, doing other things. But it's been going on quite a long time, as you can see. It did not happen in the last election cycle that people suddenly discovered that we can slander people. We can go crazy. And so one of the things that you learn in the Bible is that things just seem to be going around in this cycle. Whatever happens gets repeated over and over again. Things never quite change. And so as I'm highlighting those few things and comparing them to our present era, is mainly to indicate that the same kind of disturbances that we have, the same kind of behaviors, the bad behaviors, they exist today. They existed 2,000 years ago in the time here of Stephen, and they existed 1,500 years earlier, to the point that they were so well known that we needed to have sets of laws to deal with them. Human nature does not change. And that should be obvious to us. You study a little bit of biology, you know a lot of our makeup, there's a nature-nurture thing, but a lot of it's based on our DNA. And we just happen to have this nature that wants to do bad things. That's what the Bible tells us. We put in theological terms, talk about original sin. I'm waiting for a researcher to go out there and find the sin gene. They probably got somebody working on that. Maybe James has got somebody over there doing that. We find a part of the DNA that makes us do these things, to tell lies, to be selfish. But they're there. And so Stephen is, again, slandered. And it starts out, we're not really clear, again, what the original issue was that was being argued over. But as it changed, it was an argument that somehow Stephen was speaking against the law of Moses and against the temple. And the temple, of course, was the economic center of Jerusalem, so there's money at stake here. A lot of people coming in from all over the Mediterranean area to bring gifts to the temple. There's an economic stake in it. And that's also related to the law of Moses. But all this really was put in there to direct people towards God. And so we're sort of left, okay, is this really the people interested in the law of Moses? For what reason? Because of God or because of the wealth it brings to them? Which way is it? But I read those laws from the law of Moses so you will know that as they are accusing Stephen of violating the law, in the process they have violated the law. The accusers are the ones who are in violation of the laws that they're accusing Stephen of violating. That should be a common pattern to us because we hear people screaming about collusion and perjury on the news, and sometimes we just kick back and say, okay, even if I accept that, is the person who's accused or the accuser the worst of the parties? And I don't think I'm going to sort that out. But that's just the way it is with life. I'm going to give you a little more of the context here because we tend to think of this as a religious council of Pharisees if you don't look too closely. And yes, there are Pharisees there, and we all know Pharisees are selfish, or self-righteous and hypocritical. But if you turn back just another page or so, Acts chapter 15 or chapter 5, verse 17, when Peter is being grabbed by the same council, it says, "But the high priest rose up, and all who were with him, that is, the party of the Sadducees, and filled with jealousy, they arrested the apostles and put them in the public prison." So a few things you need to know from history. One, the high priest is appointed by the Roman government. They're the ones who choose the high priest, something we don't usually get taught. The Romans viewed that they were in charge of all religion, and so it was an obligation on their part to pick whoever was the high priest for every religion. And so they picked this person. And they picked him from a party called the Sadducees. If we study those from the other literature, the Pharisees are, as we call it, bloody-minded conservatives. The Sadducees are modernists in a way. They have this fusion of something that's almost atheist with some New Age type view of the biblical law, and so they're, as I would call it, bloody-minded modernist. And for the most part, you see, as you go through there, as the Sadducees and Pharisees are interacting, you see that there's not much bipartisanship here. They hate each other's guts, and they are usually at each other's throats. Except Stephen's going to give them a chance to come to a consensus. They're finally going to agree. We don't like Stephen, even though they hate each other. The word Sadducee is a Greek word that is transliterated from, we believe, followers of a priest named Zadok. Zadok comes from a Hebrew word, Zadik, which means righteous. So the Sadducees in their name have righteous. A little bit of trivia for you. That's effectively what calling someone a Sadducee means. On the one hand, they're modernists, but on the other hand, they call themselves, we're righteous ones, is literally what that means. Whether they viewed it exactly as that or not, I can't really say, but that's more the etymology of the word. And so some of the other histories make the claim that when it comes to self-righteousness and hypocrisy, the Sadducees were worse than the Pharisees. I'll leave that to you. This is the context. You have a council split between Pharisees and Sadducees who are looking at Stephen, and Stephen's being falsely accused. He's being accused as one who does not uphold the law, and his accusers are the ones who are violating the law in order to make this all happen. You with me? And then it goes on to his long speech in which he goes through and gives a history of what's going on. I know some of you have been through our Sunday schools. We give histories. My favorite history is the book of Judges, where 12 times Israel does stupid things that God tells them not to do. 12 times they get in trouble. 12 times God sends a deliverer. And they never seem to quite get it. Why do they keep repeating things over and over again? And so as we look at this bit of history, we've come up with a few clever sayings in our era. One of them that's been recycled over and over again since about 2400 BC, when Thucydides first came up with it. And we come up with the saying that those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. Modern philosopher gave it that flavor. The idea that if we knew what history was, we wouldn't be repeating the mistakes. Different versions of it. Our conceited error, we're Silicon Valley. We're supposed to do the next new thing. We're the ones who push forward. We're the ones that lead into the new world. And so we reject the idea that we could be part of this. And so a modern version that's thrown back at it is something like history is a set of lies agreed upon, because they don't want to accept that they are slaves to history. But even those who study it more will say, okay, we can go all the way back to the ancient world and we can find people who somehow viewed that they were not part of history, that the cycles would not affect them. And they're generally the ones who lead us back into the same errors. And so in the Bible, there really is no such thing as a progressive. There can't be. It's just we're stuck in this cycle. And it's really based on our DNA, based on our sin nature and the fact that we're people. And you can't escape it. And we can surround ourselves with all kinds of technology, and we can entertain ourselves and addict ourselves. But in the end, human character is going to keep coming back to the same patterns. And so even the ancient book of the Bible can still be very much applicable to us today. The Russians have or the Soviet era, they had a variant on these sayings. They said that the future is certain. It is the past that's unpredictable. And their meaning was that the dreary life that they had was going to keep going on no matter what happened. But what would happen would be a new set of bureaucrats would come in, and they would proceed to rewrite all the history books so that you could not predict what it was that was going to show up in the history books, but you knew your dreary life would continue. More of a cynical one. But then there's another one which is more what we're going to see here, and that is these people know the history, they agree on the history, they've studied the history, they've meditated on the history, and they still don't get the lessons of history. And I would say that's probably in many ways me growing up in the church, where I read the Bible and read these lessons and I get them, and then I go out into the real world and I do something that just completely against Scripture. And what's best for me is if I get whacked over the head really hard, really quickly, and all of a sudden I realize, hey, there's a reason that's in there. And so it seems that knowing the history doesn't protect you from repeating the mistakes, but rather it helps you to recognize when you've made the mistakes and maybe to come with the correction. And another quote along that line, Otto von Bismarck says, "The fool learns from his mistakes. The wise man learns from other people's mistakes." Anyway, I only learn from my mistakes. So, Stephen's speech. This is what he tweets. "Brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, 'Go out from your land and from your kindred, and go into the land that I will show you.'" And again, we don't know really what exactly is the argument he's trying to address, but I think a lot of it has to do with the temple. And Abraham is the one who starts all this, the Jewish nation, their hero. And he's emphasizing that Abraham's getting in communication with God a very, very long way from Jerusalem, 1,000 miles, Mesopotamia. Talks about him going out from the land of the Chaldeans, lives in Haran, which is Syria. After his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession and to his offspring after him, though he had no child. And so just again, the hero of this story, Abraham. We'll go through a few of these, Abraham, Joseph, and Moses. They don't get to enjoy the promised land at all, the place where this temple is that we're talking about. Or I should say, Abraham gets there, but he really doesn't get to enjoy any kind of temple. And God spoke to this effect that his offspring would be sojourners in the land belonging to others who would enslave them and afflict them 400 years. But I will judge the nation that they serve, said God, and after that they shall come out and worship me in this place. So he's promising eventually the return of the descendants of Abraham to the land of Israel, where they will worship. And he gives them this covenant of circumcision. It's an outward display, something probably related to being priest or something. But it also gives them some command that they're to be priests of God at the same time. And so Abraham became the father of Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. And the patriarchs, jealous of Joseph. None of you have ever had any jealousy, right? There's jealousy, I think, is one of these things that just keeps going with us. They sold him into Egypt, but God was with him and rescued him out of his afflictions and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who made him ruler over Egypt and over all his household. And so it talks about the brothers, the 11 brothers, selling off one brother. And this one brother, Joseph, who's sold off, is going to be the one that rescues the family. Actually rescues them twice, but it's the second time that they recognize who Joseph is. And so it talks about the famine, all the stories we get. And what I want to emphasize here is he's going through these stories, through these histories. These are the same histories Stephen has, as well as every member of the council. There's no disagreement here. We're not disagreeing about our history. It's all pretty much, everybody's on the same page here. And so it talks about the famine. When Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent out our fathers on their first visit. And on the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers and Joseph's family and became known to Pharaoh. And Joseph sent and summoned Jacob, his father, and all his kindred, 75 persons in all. And Jacob went down into Egypt, and he died, he and our fathers. Next one's got something a little subtle in there. They were carried back to Shechem and laid to the tomb that Abraham had bought for a sum of silver from the sons of Hamor and Shechem. A little tidbit. This gets a little more technical because Shechem is in Samaria. It's not in Judea where Jerusalem is. The Samaritans are rivals to the Jews. And the city of Shechem, right next to it, is Mount Gerizim, where there's another temple to Yahweh. In that temple, actually there's a group of Samaritans who continue to use that mountain to this day. But at that time, there's just the emphasis that there's two temples, and this is something that would have immediately stood out to the listeners there that we won't quite catch, is this idea of bringing up Shechem. What's that got to do with it? but it's probably going to start a little bit of irritation on the part of Stephen's listeners. Why are you bringing up Shechem here and this competing temple? But as the time of the promise drew near, which God had granted to Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt until there arose over Egypt another king who did not know Joseph. He dealt shrewdly with our race and forced our fathers to expose their infants so that they would not be kept alive. It was killing the boy babies, trying to get rid of these people so they won't multiply. That's what the kings were doing. At this time, Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight, and he was brought up for 3 months in his father's house. And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. And so Stephen is affirming the same kind of recognition of Moses that the Jews had. There's no difference here. He believes Moses is chosen by God to give a law. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand. But they did not understand, and on the following day he appeared to them as they were quarreling and tried to reconcile them, saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why do you wrong each other?" But the man who was wronging his neighbor, and I'll read that again, the man who was wronging his neighbor thrust him aside, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" At this retort, Moses fled and became an exile in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. So he's 40 years at this time. He's being rejected. It's emphasizing he's being rejected by the people. And rejected by a person who's violating the law. And here's where you start to have the problem. Again, this is the same history for Jews and for Christians. We don't deviate here. We'll continue on. Now, when 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in a flame of a fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight, and as he drew near to look, there came the voice of the Lord, "I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob." And Moses trembled and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, "Take off the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their groaning, and I have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt." And so he's emphasizing again the calling from God to save the people that is given to Moses. And here's where Stephen is going to start turning hostile, and yet his hostility, as I said, is entirely rooted in the same scriptures that we as Jews and Christians share. This Moses whom they rejected, saying, "Who made you a ruler and a judge?" The man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led them out, performing wonders and signs in Egypt and at the Red Sea and in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the Israelites, "God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers." And that's basically saying that Moses has prophesied the Messiah coming. But you guys were the ones who were rejecting him, in spite of all the wonders he performed. This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai, and with our fathers. He received living oracles to give to us. Our fathers refused to obey him, but thrust him aside, and in their hearts they turned to Egypt, saying to Aaron, "Make for us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses who led us out from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And they made a calf in those days and offered a sacrifice of the idol, and were rejoicing in the works of their hands. But God turned away and gave them over to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. And so their fathers, on the one hand, were following reluctantly Moses, who received the law. At the same time, they were determined to go back to their slavery in Egypt, or to worship all the other deities, again with the sexual immorality that was associated with them. So it wasn't like Moses was one they volunteered to follow. It was more like they came kicking and screaming with Moses as their leader. That was the history. But God turned away and gave them over to worship the host of heaven, as is written in the book of the prophets. Did you bring me slain beasts and sacrifices during the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You took up the tent of Moloch and the star of your god Rephan, the images that you made to worship, and I will send you into exile beyond Babylon. That's a quote from the Greek version of the book of Amos. It's a little bit different from what it shows in ours. But the emphasis here again is they had the temple there in the form of the tabernacle, but they really wanted to go and worship something else, anything else, always rebelling, never doing what they were supposed to do. That was the history. It goes on to talk about the tabernacle and the pattern that God gave. And then on to talk about David, verse 40, just before 46. So it was until the days of David, who found favor in the sight of God and asked to find a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. God didn't order the temple in Jerusalem. David requested it. But it was Solomon who built a house for him. Yet the Most High does not dwell in houses made by hands. As the prophet says, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or what is the place of my rest? Did not my hand make all these things? It's a quote from the book of Isaiah. The quote from Amos and the quote from Isaiah both have to do, the context is abuse of the temple worship, where they're going through the motions, but their heart really is in other kinds of worship. They are not being faithful. And so these, again, are provocative things to quote. And so Stephen finishes up with, you stiff-necked people, stubborn, uncircumcised in heart and ears. And that is, again, something else from the law, from the book of Deuteronomy. The idea of the circumcised heart is that we need to cut off things from our heart that are not right, things that drive us towards our sin nature. You always resist the Holy Spirit as your father did. So do you. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who announced before the coming of the righteous one, whom you have now betrayed and murdered, you who received the law as delivered by angels and did not keep it. And so the cycle that kept going through all the history of the Jews, of them being given mercy and given prophets and leaders from God, and they're always rebelling, generation after generation. But somehow, I don't know why they don't get it. Why does Stephen need to tell them this? That they're just going to do it all over again. Of course, they get furious, and the result is Stephen gets stoned and killed, which we'll go over some next week, flying off into a rage. But the lesson here is, again, the sin nature which keeps coming back. And even as we study our history and we look in it and we get it right, that sin nature is still there. And what's the escape? How do we get out of it? How do we get out of the cycle of sin? And of course, that's the big challenge of Christianity. And what we truly believe is that Jesus Christ died for our sins, first off, to take them away, and then also to give us new life through the Holy Spirit, that He is the only one who can transform us and change us. And it is through Him alone that there is any hope that this cycle of sin is to be broken. Outside of Him, there is no hope. Through Christ alone can we break out of that cycle of sin. So a few of the things I asked you at the beginning: who killed Jesus? And Matthew 20, verse 21, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give His life as a ransom for many. And if we don't remember that, just the idea that, first off, Jesus gives His life voluntarily. He is the Son of God. He has the power not to, but He gives it voluntarily by choice to take away our sins and to establish a relationship between God and man. Luke chapter 23, verse 34, as Jesus is dying on the cross. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I believe that was for more than just the guards, but the whole lot of people involved, that Jesus is saying, forgive them. And it's really not for us to condemn those who God has already forgiven. So I ask, who is it that caused Jesus to be killed? And in another sense, I view that it is for my sin that Jesus died, to rescue me from the sins that I have, that He died. And so there's a certain sense where the fault is with me and you. And Stephen is really not throwing this out there, calling them the murderers of Jesus for the purpose of condemning them so much as for the purpose of trying to prick their conscience. What about your sin? What are you going to do with that? How's that going to be solved? And that's what we count on Jesus Christ to do. And so, again, the stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in hearts and ears. And that can apply to us as much as them. And we're part of the same cycle of history, repeating it again and again. Do we want to keep repeating it? Do you want to be out of it? Do you want to be able to be something different, to do what is right in the eyes of God and be pleasing to Him? And we know it's not within our power to do so, but it's within the power of Jesus Christ to grant us healing and the Holy Spirit to change us. So I'll leave it at that. I want to leave you a little bit of time to reflect on that. So we'll, I guess, stop for a moment. I'll give a few minutes for us to just to meditate on that thought. Our sins, how they keep coming back, and how Jesus is really the only provision for it. The desire to be changed for something good that is not within our power, but it is within the power of our Creator. Let's pray for a moment. And Father, I thank you so much again for the salvation that comes through Jesus, for the forgiveness, and acknowledge again the sins that keep coming back. It seems a cycle that even though my parents warned me, yes, I fall into the same things. Father, may we warn our children. May we seek to do what is right and pleasing to you. But I pray you will empower us to really change, to be able to to do the things which are pleasing to you, pleasing in your sight. And again, thank you for Jesus Christ who enables us. For it's in Christ's name I pray.